Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast, where we are delighted to be partnering with Dublin International Film Festival, which runs from the 20th of February to the 2nd of March. In this episode, we'll be chatting with director Claire Frances Byrne and producer Ruth Coady about their feature film Ready or Not. Ready or Not has its world premiere, followed by a live Q&A on Saturday the 22nd of February. So for tickets and more, visit diff.ie. Thank you guys so much for chatting with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So I had the joy of watching Ready or Not. It's thoughtful, it's beautifully shot, it's challenging but enjoyable, and the performances of this young cast are just out of this world. So you've created a really beautiful and a really important film.
Thank you.
First, I'd like just to learn a little bit about you. Your journey in film and how you got to the point of making this.
Will I go first?
Claire, yeah, because
Yeah.
it's very exciting. I think I've been watching your career for a while.
Thanks, Gemma. Yeah, where to begin? I suppose, like, for me, it was coming home after, living abroad and all that kind of stuff. And it was finding a little tribe in Dublin that wanted to make shorts, and we literally crowdfunded. We held pub quizzes, which I thought was going to be my new career. To be honest, I thought I was going to be like a pub quiz person because we had so much fun, and we were just, scrounging money together and making these shorts on nothing. That was in like 2017, and that kind of kicked it all off. And like a lot of people will say that I've made too many shorts, there's, which I probably have, like 5 shorts later. I was in a position to, yeah, just to be put in front of someone like Ruth. Like I had my focus short, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that amazing scheme from Green Ireland. My focus short, Sister This, was in DIFF in 2020, and Ruth was one of the judges. And that was one of those kind of moments where stuff aligns and you meet the right people. And I was just I was so adamant that I needed to put something good in front of Ruth once I had her kind of audience. So that's, yeah, just the shorts are their means of getting you in front of those kind of people. And I think, as well as, kind of honing your voice as a filmmaker, of course, and getting experience.
How did you find like that process helped? Was it that like as you made each subsequent short that did you find there were certain things that really struck to your creative instincts and that you leaned into more?
Mm.
Were the things that you tried out in that process that you knew then maybe weren't for you? Were there, like, in terms of the types of stories as well that you
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like I was so lucky. I think firstly, I'm always just drawn to um working with female actors. It was always really female focused in terms of lead characters that I ended up working with. And I was editing my show reel there during the week, and I was like, this is all women. Like there's just no men in any of my work. So not that I'm against working with men, but it's obviously just something that's transpired, out of what I'm drawn to. And I was lucky within the shorts, that I got to try out different stuff. Like I got to direct a comedy, which was the best fun. Like it was probably the most fun I ever had on set. But then at the same time, looking back on it, going, oh, that's totally not really my style or my voice. So it's even more valuable when that kind of thing clicks in. Although at the same time, like making money directing comedies is also a bit of a dream job. I just don't know if it's where my strengths lie. But yeah, yeah, you definitely do. Each short is so valuable for finding out what you do and don't like, really.
and this is 5 years. So you would have premiered at DIFF in 2020. Now it's 2025, and you're back with your
Mm.
feature premiering at
Yeah,
the
yeah,
festival.
yeah.
In terms of like that kind of cycle of really evolving and then taking that next step, what was that like? Or was it such a slow process? Because again, this has been in development for a while.
Mm.
Just talk to me a little bit about that element as well.
Yeah, you kind of step into a different gear, and it's pretty hard to wrap your head around sometimes when you're not doing the thing. So you're trying to be the thing, you're trying to be the director, but you don't actually get to direct anything for a very long time. And that can be really hard. And I think getting into developing feature scripts is like a whole gear change, and it's just so long, and it's amazing. I enjoyed every second of it, like truly, but it is just a different mode, I think. And yeah, it was literally 5 years in the making. Like we had our first conversation, DIFF kind of kicked off right before the pandemic, and then pandemic times were consumed by trying to get ideas off the ground, and just like that kind of incubator type time, I guess, for ideas. So yeah, it was just an adjustment, but I actually love the development process. I loved working with Lynn. I loved working with Ruth. Seeing that script come together and seeing how many drafts there are of a feature script before it's ready to get made is mind blowing.
And does your background in as being an editor
Mm,
change the or like or what does that bring to your experience as a director? Like, do you in your
yeah.
mind are you cutting things together in your head? Can you kind of like does it give you more of a sense of pacing that you're trying to hit for?
Yeah, constantly. It's like a muscle that I think you're not even that aware of it happening in the background, but you can sort of edit in real time. And yeah, I can kind of cut stuff out in the moment as well. So it even helps on a really practical level, like, when you're talking with your first AD and you're trying to offer up stuff that maybe can wind up getting cut on the day. It's just really practical. So yeah, it helps in that sense, like so much. And even just having an understanding of how it'll come together, it's so valuable. I'm so grateful of all that kind of background, even though my editing my editing background is really funny, like it's all reality TV, but I think you get to make stories out of nothing in reality TV, so it's been really helpful.
And a sustained narrative. Like that's it's very different. Like say a 10, 15 minute short is very different from something that has to that has to kind of like have arcs over a much longer period of
Yeah.
time as well.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Like the edit, was a crazy experience because we worked with Nathan Nugent, who's obviously just like, one of Ireland's finest, and it was amazing to have him. And he taught me so much. I was so glad basically to have someone so kind of confident that it was going to come together, because that's where stepping into a feature from shorts is the hardest. It's in the edit, and it's you go, oh my God, now it's 90 minutes, and it's a crazy long time to try and, stretch your story over your canvas. And um God, like without Nathan, I think I would have lost my mind some days. Um, because you show up and you do know how to do it. Like if you've done shorts, one thing I can say with absolute confidence is that you know how to direct your feature, but the edit is really where you feel the length and you feel the difference and the new kind of territory. Or at least that's what I experienced.
That is really, really okay. I look forward to digging in a little bit deeper to that as we go through the project. So, Ruth, tell me a little bit about your experience starting off quite big, quite early on big titles.
Well, yeah. I mean, I suppose I've been at this quite a bit longer, maybe, than Claire. But yeah, I mean, I've been really lucky to have worked on some fantastic films in the past, and I mean, my trajectory was probably in a similar way to Claire's traditional trajectory. I started out making cups of tea for free and working for free, and then eventually getting paid and getting an appetite for the world of producing. And I loved it and have only done this for my whole life. And really, when Claire's work got put in front of me, what was so much of this stuff is about timing, really. I was looking for a project that felt close to my heart and a project that meant something to me. And I could see that Claire was aggressively hungry for a big leap. And I was pretty confident she could do it. And when we began talking, what I began to realize is that Claire had this very deep understanding of the characters that she wanted to portray on screen. And that was really exciting for me. Because, as a producer, you're really wanting the director to understand their characters and their film way better than you, really, And Claire felt like she understood these young characters that she wanted to talk about in a way that penetrated what I was originally interested about.
And actually, can I dig in a little bit about, because I will 100% do that, but I think it's more like to get the space where this formed and like the kind of background of where it's from, that's what I'm very interested in
Yeah.
terms of like the other projects that you've worked on that might have influenced this or your trajectory to do this, and why you're drawn to projects that are sort of, and what are the themes that draw you to projects?
So, great question. I think as a producer, certainly my experience has been I've come to different projects for different reasons at different times. Producing is hard. And so some of the films that I have been involved in were opportunities that came my way, and others were opportunities that were created. And I think where I have always, the films that I've been most excited about and most proud of are the films where I felt like the relationship between the producer and the director and the writer was through an engine of great respect and collaboration and synergy. And we had a great time making a film that we all felt very proud of. In truth, I'm not sure there's much more you can hope to achieve from a film because, from my experience, you never know what a film is going to be like. So, where I've been involved in a project, I've been excited either by an opportunity to work with a certain individual or an opportunity to board a film that I could learn stuff on. So, I was lucky enough to produce with a company called Parallel Films for a long time, where I got to learn an extraordinary amount. And that was an entry point to an awful lot of rooms and people that meant that I could work on great projects, and build on that. Why I wanted to make this film with a first-time film director, it wasn't so much like I wasn't looking to work with a first-time filmmaker. I was looking to work with someone like Claire, who I got on with extremely well. I had deep respect for her attitude to work. It's hard work, and she was up for it. And frankly, once she was up for working hard, I was willing to work hard too. And my kids were getting a bit older. And I realized that maybe I hadn't yet made a film that spoke to a personal experience of my own. And as a producer, probably you don't often, your reasons for doing films don't always have to be clear. They're for loads of different reasons. Different films, you board them for different reasons. But I began to have this itch that I wanted to scratch, which was making a film that spoke to something deep inside of me. And so when I spoke to Claire about the kind of film she wanted to make, she didn't at that point have a script, but we were beginning to talk about ideas. She introduced Lynn into the conversation. And pretty quickly on our first meeting, which was over Zoom during lockdown, the three of us, who had come from very different backgrounds, each of us, began to understand that we'd all had very similar first sexual experiences. We'd all hated them. They were all miserable. We'd all felt horrible. And at the time, I was probably 40, and I was a 40-year-old woman who still didn't have the words to put around scenarios that happened when I was 12, 13. And they weren't unique scenarios. So I very quickly began to feel at that moment, okay, this is a thing that we all want to talk about. And that I think between Claire and Lynn, they're the right people to tell what on the face of it might be tricky and difficult as a story. But Lynn is funny. Claire says she can't direct comedy or isn't very good at it. I disagree. This is not a comedy, but because of the types of characters they are, they're funny.
It's witty and it's joyful as well.
Yeah.
Like it just captures the complexity of that, like all these different kinds of firsts and the excitement about the world, like and their relationship. I think one of the most beautiful things in this film is the relationship of our three young stars and the young protagonists and
Yeah.
their journey together in like and how unclear it is. Like it's beautiful.
Oh my God, so unclear. I mean, let's face it, we're talking about the first time we ever even begin to think about sex and it comes out of nowhere and it's not clear. Um, and through that process of talking, I began to feel really super confident, as you need to, that Claire was the right person to direct those who we didn't yet know who our cast was going to be, but I knew that she was the right person to direct who they were going to be. I knew that she'd be able to talk to them in a way that they would connect with. And I knew pretty early on that similarly, they would be able to connect and understand Lynn's words so that we would not be trying to get them to say and do things that they didn't understand, if that makes sense. Um, so yeah, I mean that was sort of the journey to the beginning, and then we kicked that idea around a lot and just did an awful lot of talking about it, and then obviously you're making a movie, so you're needing to kind of decide, okay, we're going to focus here or we're going to focus there, and so that changed a lot throughout the process, and pretty early in the process we approached Screen Ireland to support us in the development, and Leslie McKim was there at the time, and they gave us that first vote of confidence to make it real and say, yeah, okay, there's something here. Let's start going on the journey together, which we did. And then obviously, then it gets really hard because then, you're writing a script and you're trying to work it out. And so I mean, actually, although it probably feels like it was a long time, 2020, and we were shooting in the summer of 23. 3 years for a script to get
It's actually pretty
is,
short,
is
yeah.
actually not bad. So, I mean, we were a very low budget film, so we weren't looking for loads of money. Um, but we did, eventually have a script that we were happy with and eventually begin to approach other partners. I mean, this film simply would never have happened without Screen Ireland. We have a bunch of partners on this film, and without them, we wouldn't have been able to bring on the others. And they have been involved in many of the films that I've been involved in, and they've been really involved in Claire's career. So that was having them meant I kind of knew we'd be able to get it made somehow, if that makes sense.
And in terms of like the variations of the script, like that development process and coming on, I'm just wondering what the process were, what like again for a budget that's so low, what was sort of streamlined along the way, because it is a period piece in a sense.
Mm.
And did that pose difficulties? And again, with different creative voices, were there different versions of the film? Like, did much change? And in terms of like scope and
Yeah.
There was a horse.
There was horses and there was scrambler bikes. I think like where I think working with someone like Lynn, like you kind of buy into the authenticity piece and the importance of the authenticity to the story that she wants to tell, you know? So goalposts don't move like extremely far from that initial kind of vision in that sense because you know what's real for her and her community and people in communities like her, it is one thing and it's so to a point, you know, that kind of stays rigid. But I guess, yeah, practicalities wise, you know, we had to lose horses, we had to lose scrambler bikes and like, you know, it's just there were so many cars at the start. And like stuff like that. But like even from day one, you know, when she started writing the script, it was always set in Bluebell and it was um always kind of mid 90s, late 90s. So that never really shifted actually.
Yeah, I mean, we did talk a lot about moving it into a contemporary story because when we worked with the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre on in terms of just soundboarding it with the script and not wanting to misrepresent, I suppose, what might be a reality. And their feedback was essentially this story could just exist today. There's no like, except there be mobile phones, really nothing has changed from their point of view. And in terms of, the misunderstanding in society of when sex does actually start being part of the conversation versus when we think it starts being part of the conversation, which is clearly there's a few years difference there, it seems. And when we were going through the process of financing it, obviously there was a huge conversation around the fact that it was period because the story on the face of it could be now, really. Lynn, who had a few red lines around things that she just couldn't move on, and one of them was the period of time. And that was actually to do with it being pre or post the millennium and what would have changed economically and from an attitude point of view. And for her, that was really important. And one of the really nice things about this whole journey between the three of us was really significant respect at all points for what each of us were bringing and remembering why we boarded the project in the first place and why we liked each other in the first place. And so when there was red lines like that, unless it was causing undue issues somewhere, we would always try and work with them rather than against them. And in terms of the actual story development, I think there was definitely at the beginning, it was less of a buddy film, probably. It was a bit more of a singular journey for the Katie character. And actually, what was interesting about that was we began to feel, and Lynn began to feel, that there was a whole boys' side of the story that we just weren't managing to tell, and that it was beginning to feel like we were only interested in telling what Katie's experience was. And what none of us were ever interested in was sort of a kind of demonizing anyone and trying to put forward the idea that actually this is not really anyone's fault. There is stuff behind all of this that's the reason it is what it is.
Yeah. It's that nuance that Lynn brings kind of to everything she does. Like there's just no judgment ever on Lynn's side. There's always empathy. And I guess that was what as we started to kind of peel that back, it was like that's the kind of magic dust that we sprinkled across the script because it's asking the viewer to look twice instead of judging, like looking once and judging. And it's everyone, not like, no kind of decision that any of these boys makes has existed in a vacuum. It's all predetermined kind of um scenarios. So yeah, I think that was a really good evolution with the boy characters, definitely.
One of the great things, yeah, is there is like there's three very strong personas representing, and I don't sort of want to go into too much, but detail because it's definitely spoilers as the slow unraveling, and I don't want to do too much of that. But again, people that might be perceived as nice or kind, like they don't always do the right thing, or how that alpha aggression male exists and why exists, and this very other kind of like sinister manipulative tactics. Like it's just all done very deftly and interestingly, and kind of like clear in terms of theme, but yeah, with that exists with empathy. But again, that's funny. Like that, I think the dialogue is very, very tight in those beats, and like that banter lifts the energy of the film and adds to that playfulness because like if everything is done in such a serious tone, really it does these girls no justice because it's like why are you there, and really it's like of course.
And they exist in a world where like your currency is being able to take the joke and being able to have a laugh. And so if that's your currency, you're constantly trying to live up to this unflappable kind of, I can have a laugh with the lads. I don't take myself too seriously. It's like, and that's what's the saddest thing. I think it's what's so relevant. It's like you watch Love Island now, and the first thing they say is like, "Oh, my type of girl is a girl that doesn't take herself too seriously." And it's like, that's 2025. That is still what is being said. Like, it's wild. So I think that's where that humor is the, it's the truth. It's how they survive.
Yeah, and I think they also all that serious stuff, and I think this is a pretty universal experience, happens between the jokes, and it happens between having
Yeah.
tea, and it happens between seeing you tomorrow. Like it's just part of it all. It doesn't kind of get separated. And one of the really important things for Lynn, and therefore became important for Claire, I think, as well as the director, was an understanding that the end of this film, which I'm not going to talk about exactly what happens, but the end of this film is really to say this stuff all happens and then everyone just keeps living on top of each other. It's not like there's no big, this is not the stuff that ends up in court cases. This is the stuff that
Mm.
ends up happening amongst friends, right? No matter where we all live. And so so much of Lynn's own experience of the world she grew up in gave direction to the script and therefore the film in a way that's very specific to her experience. And it's lovely to be able to give specificity to a general theme, if that makes sense, within a film. And so between Claire and herself, between Claire's ability to really connect with those young actors and make them feel from the very minute they met each other that they will be best friends. And by the way, they were and remain best friends. And Lynn's, I mean, I hate saying authenticity, but I'm going to say it anyway, authenticity in the script, that bit of it just felt so real from day one. And we hope that that really explodes off the screen, you know?
It is beautiful, and what's amazing is how these young actors carry those weighty themes, but they're just so gorgeous and vulnerable. And I think, yeah, authenticity like that is key to the performances that they deliver. In terms of, okay, so when you have that finished script then, and you know yourselves that like it's in a place when you're happy with, Screen Ireland have backed it, and then you're trying to find financing. Was there pushback? Was there, again, like, this is the theme of consent. It's very much so a younger woman's lived experience. What was the general response to that out and about in the world?
I mean, the general response was no, thanks. That's terrifying. And what do you mean you're going to have actors of that age playing out these scenes, really? And in truth, I mean, as I say to my kids, 98% of my job is just people saying no, thank you. So that's okay, and I think, we're so, I mean, I live, I've lived and made films all over the world, so I'm really clear on how lucky we are in Ireland to have the kind of support system we are for filmmakers and for real stories and for representation and for all sorts of things. And we are so outsized in Ireland as to how much money goes towards filmmakers and first-time filmmakers compared to loads of other similar countries. And so the first thing I would say is that although there were loads of no's, and although even from Screen Ireland there was script pushback, having Screen Ireland support out in the marketplace allowed the conversations to keep going. So even if there were no's in places, there was always going to be another conversation made possible. And then we approached Bankside Films, the sales agent, and they got very excited about the film and they got very excited about Claire.
And when would this have been?
That was quite early. So we, with the help of Screen Ireland, actually, we made a sizzle reel and put together a pitch deck. And again, Claire's work ethic is that she was nearly kind of always one step ahead. And it was like, yeah, cool, we'll do this, we'll do that, So that was all, she was on fire for all that stuff and created a great sizzle reel and a great deck that we were able to share with people. Just because when it's a first time filmmaker, yes, you've got your short films, but from a financing point of view, it only tells them so much. So then they look to the producer to go, are you sure? And we're saying, yeah. And then they're saying, okay, well, who are all the famous actors going to be? And you're saying, well, they're all 14. So you've never heard of it before. And so the value proposition is difficult, right? So then you just have to keep going and have to move the needle and have to develop the script more and have to make it more enticing and have to get people talking more to Claire and understanding her vision. And then we began to make it sort of impossible for people not to see the value in it by collaborating with Bluebell, finding a way that we could shoot it at a particular budget level, bringing on people like Nathan Nugent, who give people so much confidence because he's just, one of the best editors in the world. And also another very nice person. And just really kind of creating a package that feels like, okay, there's going to be something in this. And it's getting closer to the point where we can take a risk on it. And also back to the original point, Screen Ireland are there. Okay, well, if they believe in this, then maybe we can too. So really finding the right partners for the right project, like always. So Bankside were there. They were very excited. That was fantastic because it also allows, having a sales agent allows you to add another layer of confidence to the project, that it will have a market value, to sound crude. And so RTE came on, which again was just a really big vote of confidence for what we had done to get the project to where it was. The national broadcaster feeling like this was something they would show Ireland. And we had this extraordinary partner in Article 1, Cassidy Ugla, who also just was willing to take the leap because it just spoke to her, really.
And in terms of feedback on this journey, when you had gotten, say, no's from certain areas, so were the main point, but were the themes maybe challenging for people as well? Like, did you?
Yeah, I think generally it was like they're very young, and
Yeah.
the reason we didn't age them up is because it was real. It was a lived experience. Now, it's not a true story, but it is
True. It's true.
It's
for
based
most
on
people.
based on experience
truths.
that
Yeah.
had. And we'd also spent this time sense checking it with the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and had some really meaningful and powerful conversations with Nolene Blackwell, who was there at the time, about why maybe this story would resonate and might be interesting to be told and to be put out there. And I think having the people who'd said yes, having Lynn and Claire continue to be willing to go on the journey, and having people who I would say are in the know saying this is absolutely on the money, was enough for us to be willing to keep going. But it was definitely many times the question came up, what about making them just a bit older? And we just weren't going to make that film because that wasn't the story that we all got into this together to talk about, which was, oh my God, it's crazy how young you end up in a situation where you don't know which way is up, boys and girls. And so, yeah, of course, the no's kept coming, and the feedback generally was that, yeah, it was tough. It was like, because we weren't looking for loads and loads of money, this isn't a big budget film. And we're so grateful to the people who did come on the journey with us, because they believed, and I think, Claire has proved that it came together as not just a quote unquote important film, but actually a great film. that I think audiences will enjoy. So I think we weren't surprised by the no's, although some of them were more frustrating than others. And at times we didn't think it was going to happen. Absolutely. There were moments
Yeah.
when the no's were so impactful and sort of felt like road ending that we thought this is
They were all based from
road.
fear too, weren't they? Like it was just a fear of the kind of the age and what you're putting these characters through kind of thing. But I suppose we kept the backbone of us doing it all was that it is based in reality, so um which is an amazing thing to be able to work from.
Yeah. And in terms of, again, it just highlights things that maybe people that don't like people that, didn't grow up as young women don't might not necessarily think these things happen, but they happen every single day. And I
Yeah,
know any people it didn't happen to. So saying this didn't happen, yeah, it just
yeah,
didn't happen to you. And your experience of it is very,
yeah,
very different because it's from the other perspective. And it's that like privilege in society and what that looks like. And I think that's one of the the things it does so well, but does very deftly. Like like it's not it doesn't you're not being slapped in the face with a moral message, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things about how this works is that subtlety and the confusion. Because again, like if it's like this is wrong, which is I mean it's clearly wrong, but you do empathize. Like these are young women with strength and agency who are figuring it out, and you get that as well. Like they're sort of empowered in their space too. And that I think that's one of the most enjoyable things when watching it. But I really want to, Claire, ask you a little bit about so when the financing was kind of coming into place, what's what's your journey then in going, okay, so this is the vision, this is the aesthetics.
mm,
Like when does that start coming into play? Was that something you were always kind of like doing for lookbooks for development, or is that something that
yeah.
really comes into play then when it's in place?
I mean, at that point, we probably knew it was Bluebell, and like that kind of dictated so much of the visual language, I guess, and the color. Because if you haven't been to Bluebell, you should, well, take a stroll around it now, but it does look different than what we shot actually, which is kind of insane as well. But it was full of these like terracotta colored maisonettes and flats and stuff. And then you have like, the green grass and the blue sky. And it it made sense because we knew very early on, I knew I didn't want it to be in this like concrete jungle grey landscape. Oh, we're in working class Dublin, so let's make it sad and rainy. And, I always knew I wanted bright colours, sun shining, which is apparently not something you can actually order, unfortunately. But like that was the dream anyway, was to just, pack it full of as much colour as possible and then let those colours kind of mature throughout the film rather than strip anything out, just sort of change the colour themes a little bit. So um Bluebell was a massive part of the kind of the landscape of the film, I guess. And then the other kind of very early consideration I was kind of going through and obsessing over was casting, and I was just like shitting myself about who we were going to find for these characters. And like when you saw the script, and it's in its entirety, what you're asking of the actor who has to play Katie is just so much, and she needs to be convincingly 13, 14. So it was something I did not take lightly, basically. That was what kind of um, consumed me for the guts of a year, I would say, was who is this girl going to be and how are we going to find these young people? So I was out in D1. I was going to, various youth clubs, and I was just really getting myself acquainted with every kind of um, inner city like youth club that was interested in drama and film. And we're so lucky, we have things like Real Youth, which is an initiative to get young people in communities like D1 and like Dolphins Barn and the Canal communities involved and interested in film. And they literally make short films and they have a festival and like it's all going on. So I was lucky to kind of tap into that. Um, and put myself at ease that they were out there. So when we did finally kick into gear in an official way, that, we sort of knew where we were looking.
And finding the roles, was there any things that were particularly challenging to find? Who would have been the hardest to kind of pencil in? Did any of the characters sort of shift as you found their actors?
Oh yeah, completely. Like most of them did, to be fair, but I had a completely different Katie in my mind. Like it was a young Lynn, and like it was so solid and it was so clear in my mind. But we just couldn't find her. And again, it was going back to that niggle in the back of my head, like this girl has to show up 20 out of 20 days on set. She's carrying the film. Like it's such an enormous thing to ask of someone. So when Ruby Conway Dunne walked in the door, we kind of had this conflict of like, God, she's so young. She was only 14 at the time. And we were hoping, to cast someone maybe 16, 17 that just looked really young. So myself and Ruth were conflicted because we also knew so much that it was her, and we just knew that she was gonna show up every day and like, just absolutely knock everyone's socks off, which she did. So that was the biggest one, and you have to kind of get over your preconceived notions of who the character is a little bit. And she still brought all that edge, that I was looking for, and God, she just brings like such emotional depth to every scene. There's so much going on in that girl's face. Um, and yeah, so I think she was definitely the biggest shift in terms of my mind. And then, I mean, when we found like the likes of Alicia and Danny in our one of our many big open call things, we were just so buzzing, weren't we, Ruth? Like
Yeah.
you'd want to see some of these girls walking through the door, and we were just so excited, to kind of put them in front of a camera for the first time.
When you got your dream team then, in terms of rehearsal, and what's your process in kind of like getting them into the headspace of their characters?
Yeah, like we got them in fairly quickly. Once we knew who they were, we got them in.
I
And
think Claire, go
I,
back a step and talk about
oh yeah,
as well. Like, so we would have, when you were confident, they had not, they would have been given very tame scenes
oh,
to,
of
to,
course,
to
yeah,
read in the first instance, and then all of their parents were given the full script first to read before we talked about making an offer for the role. Um, and
yeah,
so the first steps, I suppose, were there were quite a few steps before an offer would have been made in terms of we would have had that
yes,
we
of
had
course.
calls and conversations with their parents actually before proceeding with any further.
And what we
Like,
didn't probably realize or like fully like fully sort of understand is we were kind of casting the parents as well as the
yeah, yeah,
kids.
yeah,
Like Ruby and Alicia, who play Katie and Sarah, were both 14 at the time. So their mothers, Lou and Lynn, were there every day. They were there for all of the rehearsal time, and they were there every day on set. And of course, it as things transpire, it all kind of dawns on you like, oh, here's the next big challenge. And we were definitely afraid of what way they'd react to the script and what we were asking their girls to go through. But at the same time, they just they just related to the script so much, and they weren't really afraid of the script because they had come from that world themselves. And so they were so kind of encouraging and supportive from day dot, and we just all we had to do was live up to our word of, you know, just keeping the girls safe at all times and never putting them through anything that would actually cause trauma rather than doing the opposite, which was what we were obviously setting out to do. Um, so yeah, their reaction was a great vote of confidence, actually.
And tell me about that process of keeping them safe. Intimacy coordination, the what's it like shooting? What are the steps that are in place? Where are the protocols from?
Yeah, we kind of had to write. the book a little bit ourselves because the protocols aren't necessarily here in Ireland. So we based a lot of our kind of rules around the UK model. And then also just things like age gaps. Like, we had a 14-year-old play opposite a 20-year-old. That's Dane White O'Hara's character. And I was like, well, they can't kiss in real life. That's just for both. It's too much. And you can actually do so much without showing anyway, and that's what this film is all about. It's kind of suggesting and not always explicitly showing necessarily. So we really had to lean in on that.
And you'd also spent so at the beginning, once the parents had read the script and then they'd had a conversation with the child, and then everyone had been through a process with a psychologist. So there was quite a protracted period of stuff that needed to happen before the roles were landed. And then my memory, Claire, I think, is that your first meeting then with them in a rehearsal space was actually run more with the intimacy coordinator to begin with. So
yeah,
from sort of the outset, there was a sense of, and it was true, that there was in the first place, a need for everyone to feel safe and kind of what the rules were to keep everyone feeling safe. And
yeah,
there were lots of words that were presented and words that were agreed and that would be used in order to make sure that everyone felt safe at all times and could
yeah,
back off at any time. And I think, to Claire's point, that there was never a moment when we didn't have these parents who gave up, by the way, they had all of other children, jobs, commitments, etc. And they, for the period of prep and for the shoot, were there with us and their children every day and were always part of the conversation that Claire would have before. We would always have a conversation with them before we were going to rehearse a big scene. But what's a bit different about having scenes like this for Claire to shoot was also that, Claire, you had to do an awful lot of rehearsal during the shoot, right?
yeah. And we had Rose, our intimacy coordinator. She was there at the very beginning when we were rehearsing, and we did those kind of consent-based workshops with her, which was cool. And actually, they're kind of just a bit of a laugh as well. So it was all working towards, getting the group nice and tightly knit. And then like everything, every single thing, there's so much, and we could talk about this in particular for hours when we talk about this film because everyone fed into the safety piece and like even the schedule, every scene, it was curated so that all of our heavier scenes didn't happen until 3 weeks in, where everyone is comfortable with each other. Everyone has a shorthand. And then throughout the weeks leading up to those scenes where we're finding time to go and do some choreography or do some rehearsal or have a tough chat. Sometimes it was pulling Ruby and her mum into a room and having a difficult conversation about what, the meaning was behind the scene and stuff. But we also the working with the intimacy coordinator was fascinating in a way because the added layer we had was body doubles. So, it was it became very technical, which in a way kind of helps because
Mm.
you're really focused on minutia at a time and you're never really putting the whole thing together in its kind of terrifying way until the edit. Um, so
And I think also
yeah,
you were pretty much, I mean, we had this extraordinary crew who were so willing to buy into the idea of kind of nearly overdoing the safety. Not that you can overdo the safety, but because, these were all young actors and because of what was going on. And the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre actually did a course for all of our crew, which was so brilliant.
yeah,
And really that was right at the beginning. And it just meant that actually, because the great irony of making a film like this would be that the crew behind the camera were affected and we didn't lay a framework for them to be supported. So um, the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre run these extraordinary courses for workplaces, and they sort of again gave us words and tools and structures to allow, I hope, everyone to feel like they were in a protected place when they came to work every day. And you know, film crews are some of the best, hardworking, most professional individuals I know, and they showed up knowing that those kids needed to be protected every day, and they did that, you know, and I think the reason we could shoot these scenes was about the crew. It was about the writing. It was about Claire's relationship and her approach to the kids. It was about the parents being there. It was about our child protection officer. It was about our intimacy coordinator. It was about, you know, the people who drove them to set every day. Like it was, the whole piece had to feel like they felt good and they felt safe, right? And so I think everyone played a bit of a role in that in a way.
God, it's such an interesting point that you made about it affecting the crew, that the weight of those themes that like, okay, so if you're on the ground, if you're just like there in the coal face, you're dealing with that small piece of information and getting that across the line so you don't sit back and feel the heaviness of this. And I'm just wondering, like I watched just another piece of cinema in which an actor inhibited this very toxic space and was improving with actors, and it took a really heavy toll on that on the male actor, like
Mm.
understanding those behaviors. And I wonder, it's probably too early to say like that reaction, but maybe that reaction is instinctive of how the themes are challenging. And I'm just wondering how that manifested in terms of like, does occupying that sort of like negative toxicity in terms of actors, and like, and again it's very empathetically drawn, but I think in the context of where this sits, the depth of that meaning is very clear, especially if
Mm.
you've read the entire script. um like, what was the sort of fallout from that? Because I think if you're a woman you probably know already, but is was that a little bit confronting for some men on set maybe?
Yeah, I think I was so aware of the big ask for the male actors and, you know, still young men like we have Dane White O'Hara and Lewis Brophy who were 20, I think, at the time. And there was a lot being asked of them and their characters were doing some very questionable things, you know, and um you know, just about it was just about trying to sort of make myself available, I guess, to talk about sort of why uh and give them their backstory about, you know, that they were. Remember, I said something to Dane at one point, and it was that his character is a piece of the fabric of the world, as opposed to being like a character in this story that's gonna, you know, maybe change or have growth. He's representing, you know, a symptom kind of what he's grown up in. Um, and so, I mean, and they did such amazing work. Like they really took it on and they got what we were trying to do and they understood that we were trying to stand on the right side of it, I guess. Um, and they nailed it, you know. But yeah, it has to be tough and it has to be tough trying to um kind of walk away from that then after being in that heavy space. And I think what Ruth did and what the whole team did, you know, when we had, like, as you mentioned, we had a psychiatrist, we had our intimacy coordinator was doing regular one-to-one check-ins to make sure that everyone was only going as far as their comfort zone and knew exactly what was coming. Um, and yeah, it was just trying to keep those lines of communication just constantly open.
Yeah. Because you can kind of see how, you know, even if you're a sound person or something, we kind of know this exists and you read the script, but sometimes you mightn't, or like you mightn't have read the script or like fully get it. You go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then actually being confronted with what that is can be very surprising, because I think for most of us, we know that's there and we know what it's saying, but you can see that it might be a surprise for people. And I think that's what's so great about this film and why it is so important, that it just sheds light onto something that just is so there in society.
It was funny. Paul San, our grip, came to the cast and crew screening, and his comments were that it was so much darker and sort of like harder hitting than he anticipated it was going to be. And I think like if you were on set with us, you never felt the heaviness. Like the girls were singing, like they would literally arrive in from their bus every morning and they'd be singing like ABBA or something. And then we were, just blaring like 90s dance tunes and doing all the dance moves like constantly. It was always just a big kind of party. We kept joking that it felt like summer camp. So
Yeah.
I think the crew really, that was so infectious, I got totally infected by it. Like it was the best fun actually, even though we were tackling all this kind of hard stuff. But like, that's I think where Paul's comments came from because he was just like, but we were just laughing and smiling all the whole summer, So,
We had a great crew. Mary McCarthy did a great job of crewing with, fantastic people. And, when those kids went into whatever department they went into, when they were getting mic'd, when they were being lit, when they were being in costume, makeup, wherever they were, if they were being driven down to set, whoever was in charge of them at that time, like they knew the assignment, they knew this was to make sure these kids had a great time. And they did that. And I think all the grown-ups in the room knew that they were going to play an important role in keeping this ship moving forward. So we weren't alone, everyone bought into it. Yeah, great.
And in terms of then the edit, so when you kind of get your like first all your kind of like rough scenes together, un kind of finessed, did you have to go back and do any pickups? Were you kind of like very confident it's there? Was it something that you were working to like, was there a bit of a fright and then you're like, oh no, it's fine.
well, I mean, I was like, I don't know what I was like. I couldn't see the wood from the trees. Like I was so bamboozled by the whole thing. And then you watch an assembly cut and I was like, I just don't know what the fuck we did, to be honest. And then Ruth is like, this is okay. This is okay. Because she knows that it was okay. Well, I didn't know that it was okay, but she was like, this is going to be good. So thank God she was there to sort of like calm me or like talk me off the edge. It's a horrible experience. I don't think any director has a good time watching an assembly cut. It just isn't a nice, comfortable feeling, it's a weird thing. And I knew I was also going to be kind of, which I is what I asked for, and it was good, but I also knew that I was facing into about 2 weeks of sitting on my own with it, and I was afraid of that as well. So that was a tough mental space to be in. But I mean, yeah, it's probably one of the most kind of painful kind of moments of creating a film is that initial time in the edit because you just have so much work to do. But yeah, we got there in the end and we did come across kinks in the chain that we needed to go back and get. It's kind of too generous to say pickups because we literally just did very like guerrilla style, one or two casts at a time, close-up shots here and there, because we really didn't have the scope to do pickups. So we did what we could, but in a very minimal kind of way.
Cool. And in terms of then like getting the sound mix and finding the tone, was that all stuff that was sort of decided on before that you put in, because it's a very specific feel, that 90s
Mm,
that 90s vibe. Was that and the like and then even in terms of
yeah.
like, I mean, you wanted those bright colors for the grade. Was that all stuff that you're like, okay, once it's finally locked in, then I can kind of relax? Or were these all things that we're working on adjacent as you're editing?
We did it kind of very linearly in terms of like the we locked the edit, and then we moved into sound, and it felt like we were in sound for years. It was a strange one sound-wise, wasn't it? It felt like we were in there. Felt like we lived in the sound kind of dubbing suite for years and years. But we did that, and then we focused on the color. So it was quite like focused in the sense that we moved along the kind of the what you call it, the working line, you know. Um, but I think where some of those sound design elements or like music and even the voiceover, that was literally all of that stuff was just Nathan creating a really safe space for us to just try loads of shit on. And when we were frustrated, we did say like, let's just like do a VO and see if that's crazy. And then it'll kind of start to unlock a few things. So I think that's where you truly do start to do the third rewrite. You know, they say you write the film three times and the third time's in the edit. And it was for us, it was kind of late in the day and we were just not feeling great about certain things, and we started to throw like the wackiest music on to our temp score and like I'm talking like stuff out of left field. And
We had a whole classical score at one stage.
we had a whole like, yeah, like a brassy, we kept calling it the
Like French
French
bistro music.
feeling.
Yeah.
French bistro music. It was so weird, but it's what we needed, wasn't it? To kind of like shake us up.
Yeah. Or maybe just see that there were like other possibilities, maybe. Or
Mm,
yeah. And Stephen was obviously, but we brought Stephen Shannon in to
yeah.
we had we'd worked with Aslan to have that, very prominent track in the film and be, I suppose, the heartbeat of the film. And that was to do with that being for Lynn, actually, that was the track of the times for her.
Oh
And
yeah.
Claire loved it when we all loved it. So it was great to have that and to have their support. And then everything else was going to be score because we couldn't afford to license another track. And so Stephen brought this attitude to the score, which again was, I suppose, he listened to what Claire wanted, but then also said, "Yeah, great, and also what about this, and also what,"
Yeah.
and able to create something out of nothing, which is always the extraordinary thing about sound and music and all of that. So Stephen was great, and we lived in Outer Limits in Dunleary for a really long time, and there they were all brilliant. And we had Kira, great,
Ugly.
yeah,
Yeah.
and she was great, and really enjoyed it and understood that there was this need to bring even more sort of joy out of the environment and not sort of lean into the darkness, but find the lightness within it. Because these are kids and they are still having a good time, even though they're going through this shit. But yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that I think every filmmaker has to keep finding the faith, right, in that process.
And then in the end, so is this the world premiere?
Yeah,
Yeah.
DIFF will be the first time the world sees it, which is really exciting. And actually, I mean, Grania Humphreys, we just kind of can't talk highly
Mm.
enough of. Grania's been an enormous supporter of me, of Claire, of the film, of Irish film, of filmmakers, of everyone.
He's
And
such a champion.
yeah,
Yeah.
and once she kind of commits to something, she really leans in. And so we had spoken to her when we were making the film about whether we could bring it to Dublin as a natural full circle moment for where it began, I suppose.
Like that's a brilliant origin story as well.
Yeah,
Like
it
it
was
started
great.
here 5 years ago and now it's
Yeah, that was really cool and we liked that. And so we really wanted to make that happen if we could align timing wise. And we have, which is great. And obviously Grania had to feel the film was worth the slot. And here we are. So we really love that we're doing it there. Yeah, that's fantastic.
and there's such an important sort of educational element to this in terms of what it covers. I think what's brilliant is how deft it is, but it really spurs conversations. Could you see it sort of going on further after its festival and release to do anything else?
We would love to see it in schools. Like that's always what we've said. And it's because young people will find stuff within this film that we didn't even know we put in there. Like, I just think they will be able to dissect it and and they'll instantly see the truth in it. That would be a dream, yeah.
Just as a conversation starter, really. Yeah. I think like we're not claiming to have any of the answers for anyone or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah.
It would be maybe a great starting off point for conversations for boys and girls, not to exclude either side. Yeah.
100%. And I actually think because there's such an array of perspectives, but each one is done with empathy and nothing is sort of clear cut. It is questions. Like it isn't definitively said, but is that, and it's the retrospective lens. So it's a little bit safer and easier to look at. And yeah, it has that little bit of distance. It is such an incredible watch. I think it's powerful, but again, it's an easy watch. You're drawn in, like these young people are so great, like so talented. And I'm like, and the male actors, like they were carrying a lot, like across the board. Everyone on that screen, they were like charming, well realized, and like
Yeah.
again, like we were talking about these heavy themes, but at the end of the day, it isn't lingering in that. It's funny, it's witty, it's heartfelt, it's bittersweet, it's like warm and like affectionate, and these characters are strong and they have agency, and there's an element of hope to it. So it's a really enjoyable watch. I can't wait for everyone to get to see this with an audience as well. I think that will be just such a really enjoyable experience to go on that emotional journey, like with a group.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. And Claire, for you for the first film, the first one of many.
Yeah, I know.
Of many.
Ah.
Oh, that's so exciting.
And for Lynn as well, it's Lynn's first produced feature-length screenplays.
Yeah.
Oh, fabulous. So there'll be a lot of celebrating. There'll be a lot of celebrating after this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be a loud theater, I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
no, I mean, no one louder than our cast and their family. No one's going to get a word in edgeways.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us.
You, Gemma. Yeah, that was great.
Thanks a million, Gemma. That was lovely.
Thank you so much for listening. So on the 22nd of February, Ready or Not will have its world premiere, followed by a live Q&A. So for tickets and to check out the full festival programme, visit diff.ie.